Hi, this is John with Fix It Planet. Today we got a Lenovo ThinkPad 1838, and it needs a new charge port, it needs a new battery, and the power button is falling off. So that's the charge port right there. Here's the model. And it's pretty easy to open up. Underneath this little, on the sides here, you're gonna have some cables. So we're gonna pop this little cap off here. And there's two screws that we need to take out before we can open it. Okay, and that's all there is to that. Now, we want to remember on the left side here, we need to be very careful. There's a lot of cables that are still connected. We're going to slide our fingernail, or you can use a thin pick, in between the seam and start separating it. It comes off pretty easily, but you got to be careful down there. You can see where there's still a lot of cabling connected. So we'll be opening it from left to right, a little bit like a book. But you're not going to open it up all the way because the display connector is still attached and there's very little slack there for you to work with. So you don't want to do any damage to that connector. There's a couple of other things. We need to disconnect this cable here, this one, and that one right there is connected, that one right there, and this one that runs from here to here, we're going to disconnect that as well. And we're going to take out that battery, and somehow during the process of this video, I never did get the me disconnecting the battery or reconnecting it. So somehow in there, during this process, I've managed to not get that in the video, so I apologize. And I was really having some difficulty with the camera. Didn't want to focus a lot of the time, and it kept freezing up on me and giving me a lot of trouble. So those two flex cables we just disconnected are all that we have to do for that, but we want to lay it down, screen facing down, and then sort of lay the back over so you can get easy access to this connector, which is actually stuck down pretty good with a bunch of tape. Now the tape is a little bit difficult to get loose, so you just have to do what you have to do to get that out of there. So it's okay if it gets torn or whatever. You can replace it with capped on tape, or you can just lay it back down a little bit torn. As long as you don't damage the connector or the cable, you're fine. So I'm just going to cut a little of that tape there. We're not cutting the connector. And there's another piece of tape here attached, holding that connector in place. So we've got to get that out of the way. And some of the sticky stuff from the tape is going to stick down, so we're just going to kind of cut through that with our spudger. And there's a sort of little plastic handle kind of attached to this end of this cable, and it sticks to the tape. So kind of be careful of that when you're removing it so that you don't mess up that cable. So you want to pull it loose. Anyway, the tape looks kind of bad, but the connector's in good shape. That's all we care about. That's that plastic handle thing that is pretty useless. And we inspect the other side as well. So this is the connector on the back of the display. We want to make sure there's no damage there. and we haven't messed anything else up. So now that we've got that separated and off out of our way, we can get started taking this thing apart. So as you can see, we just kind of suddenly the battery's not connected anymore. So sorry, just be real careful removing the battery connector. It just pulls straight out from the connector. So there's some little aluminum foil looking stuff and some foam. We're going to have to get that out of our way because that's where our charging port is, and we're going to need to do some soldering over there. And we need to disconnect these ribbon cables. These little flex cables have to get out of our way here because they're over the top of the battery. There's actually 4 screws holding the battery down, and one of those screws in the bottom right corner there is also holding down the little power button board that's got the volume buttons and the power button, and we'll be seeing more of that later on in the video. So you've got 2 more screws on this side. And those 4 screws are out, so we'll be able to take the battery out now. Okay, now that that's out of our way, we can go ahead and remove this Wi-Fi card. So we'll just carefully disconnect the antennas, and just pay attention to the gray and the black cable, so you can remember where they came from, put them back where they go. There's 1 screw holding that card in, and we can now remove it. And there's another antenna over here. We need to very carefully disconnect that and get it out of our way. Now there's going to be 4 more screws total, 2 black screws and 2 silver ones that are holding the rest of the main board in. So we just took the 2 black ones out. We've got 2 silver ones in the top left corner. And those will have to come out as well. And we've also got some connectors. Down here's one, and there's another one right here. We need to disconnect those. And then we'll take out these 2 silver screws. Now we're ready to take this motherboard out. Now it does kind of sit down in there a certain way, so you want to make sure to pay attention when you're taking it out, and then you just want to put it back in. Down towards the bottom there's a little bit of plastic it kind of sits under. So we're going to put some flux on this connector, on this little charge port, and we're going to use the hot air station, and we're just going to heat it up and take it off. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of flux on these 2 holes. There's 4 total where the anchors go. We're going to start on these 2 holes on the outside edge and get those cleaned out, get any solder out of those with our wick. And then we're going to wick off any solder that's remaining on the pads, get those cleaned up, and then we'll tin them with some fresh solder. Then we'll flip the board over and we'll work on the other 2 holes. Now that we've done that, we'll be able to put some fresh solder on the pads. So I'm just kind of checking to make sure, because I can't really see very good, that those holes were cleared. Now we're going to touch up these pads with some fresh solder. It's called tinning the pads. So they'll be ready to go when we're ready to put the new charge port on. And we've also put some capped on tape around the area where we're working so that we didn't get any of the hot air from the hot air station into any other components that we don't want to have damaged or pop off the board for some reason. So now we're going to flip it over and work on the other two anchor holes and get those wicked out. Get all the solder out of them. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and get out anything that might be left in the other two holes as well, if there is any. So most of this I would actually do under a microscope, but I'm trying to do as much of it as I can just on the camera, because I don't have a camera for the microscope yet. So I'll do as much as I can under the camera, and then I'll touch up under the microscope, and we'll look through the microscope and see the finished result, because I can't do both at the same time. So again, I'm just sort of checking to see that there's nothing obstructing those holes. Now I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to get the last remaining bit of solder out of those holes and clean up the old flux. So a little bit later on in the video, I'm going to solder on the power button. Right now, we're going to take this capped on tape and clean this mess up, and there it is, nice and clean and ready to put the new one on. So we're going to get our new charge port and add some flux here and put our new charge port into position. So I'm going to solder the power button back on the power button board a little bit later on in the video. But it's going to be hard for me to show the actual soldering part, so I'm just going to kind of show what it looks, what it should look like, what it actually looks like when it's off, and then get it prepped and show you what it looks like when I'm done. Right now we're just going to tack down these anchors and then make sure that everything's aligned properly before we decide to solder the pins. So once we get all the anchors soldered in and we're happy with that, then we'll move on and solder these pins. And we're basically going to solder each pin individually for the most part, generally speaking. And we'll touch it up under the microscope. Make sure everything is perfecto. So there's what it looks like when it's all done. And that's about the best I can do. That's the back side. And here's the side view. Now, well, here is the power button board, and as you can see, the power button has fallen off. The solder joint was just cold, but these are the volume buttons, and that's what it should look like. And this is what it looks like now. So luckily nothing was really damaged. Those posts just go into those holes but don't solder in, so it's not a very good design. It's just a little bit of solder on the front there and the 3 legs in the back. Now this part's a little bit blurry. I don't know what was going on with the camera that day, but it was giving me all kinds of trouble, and unfortunately this shot didn't turn out very well. But I'm basically just going to tin these pads with some fresh solder is all I'm doing here. And then I'll pick it up and reposition it somehow so we can get a better look at it. And we'll get all that flux cleaned off so we can see what we've done. So we just tinned those pads, and now we've cleaned all that old solder flux off. And everything's nice and shiny and ready to go to put the button on. So this is through the microscope about the best I can do. That button right there, those 3 legs are going to get soldered on. And then on the front, there's just a couple of little pieces of metal that just sort of touch, as you can see on either side, that just barely solder on. So it's not a very strong design. There's it all soldered up and ready to go. Couple of different angles. You can see we've soldered the front and the 3 legs, and that's it. Now we've got all 3 of our buttons back where they belong. We can start putting this thing back together. So the bottom right corner of the motherboard kind of goes down into the chassis first, and then everything sort of lays down nice and flat. So make sure you don't have anything underneath the motherboard that could prevent it from laying down flat. And we'll go ahead and put our 2 silver screws back in. And we'll go ahead and connect up these connectors. I think those are for the speakers, but to be honest with you, I can't remember. I think they're for the speakers, but don't hold me to that. So now we're going to put the other two black screws in to the motherboard, and that's the 4 screws that hold the main board in. Now we have 4 more screws that hold in the battery, but before we can do that, we need to reconnect our antennas. Gonna put our Wi-Fi card back in and screw it down. Now we can reconnect those antennas. Make sure we put them back where they came from. Now we can put our battery in, and the way that works is the battery goes in first, and then the little power button board goes down over the top of that bottom right corner of the battery and then screws down. So we can put these 2 screws in over here and put the power button board in, and then put a screw in on top of that. I'm just going to kind of check and make sure the buttons are lined up properly. We can go ahead and put our Flux cables back in. So again, just a reminder, make sure that you reconnect the battery, because in the video, somehow or another, I've managed to not capture that. So I don't have it plugged in or unplugging it. But trust me, I did. So we're going to put our little piece of foam back and our aluminum foil. A little bit of shielding over there for what it's worth. And we got one more screw we need to put in for the battery, and there we go. And that's it. Now we're ready to reconnect all of our cables. So we're going to start in reverse. We're going to go ahead and connect up our display cable first. And we're going to do it the same way we took it out. We're going to lay the display screen facing down and lay the back side on top of that. And then we're just going to make sure that we insert that cable very carefully so that we don't bend anything or damage it. And we'll just put our tape back down over the top of it. Make sure it's stuck down real good. And I couldn't get to that. So there's a piece of tape under there. There we go. Make sure it's all the way in, not crooked. It's stuck down really good. And now we can bring it back over and open it up again, just like we did when we started, and reconnect these 2 little ones. So we got this little one on the bottom down here, and I couldn't figure out if it was easier to use the tweezers or my fingers, so I used a little bit of both and managed to get it done. Now we got one more left to plug in, and we're ready to go. So some of this is just, I'm trying to make sure you guys can see what I'm doing on the camera, and it puts me in an awkward position. but we still managed to get it done. And we snap that one down, and now we can go ahead and close it up. Everything just kind of snaps back down around the edges. Then we can put the 2 screws back underneath that little button. Little button cap. And that little cap just snaps right back on. Now we're going to plug it in and see if everything is good to go. Hey, now got a charging symbol. Let's power it on. Now that says Lenovo, but it is absolutely as blurry as can be. So I don't know, I took it at another angle here and you can see it's nice and sharp. So it's not the tablet, it is my camera, which was not having a very happy day today. So there's our little lightning bolt, and the battery is charging, and that's basically it for this repair. I don't really particularly know how this tablet works, to be honest with you. It's kind of laid out in a sort of awkward way. But everything is working, and I hope this was useful for somebody out there, and appreciate you. If you like and subscribe and all that good stuff, share, really helps me out. And I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.